Hi, Bob. Welcome to the very first episode of Smooth Operators Guide by LiveDocs, where we interview founders, leaders, and executives who use data as their superpower, or in other words, a smooth operator such as yourself. A quick intro about LiveDocs is that we are a data exploratory platform where you can do three things: bring your data from anywhere, choose from a list of pre-built metrics, or build your own metric. Finally, with all of this, build your team's data landing page. And Bob, uh, we know you're a serial entrepreneur, a data expert, and an author. I got lucky to bump into you in an elevator ride in Austin. In my 10 years of startup experience, you need to have a few things right? Like you got to be either lucky, you got to have strong tailwinds, have pedigree, have a great network, and most importantly, a supporting economy. But you went ahead and started your entrepreneurial journey right after one of the greatest economic collapses in history, the collapse of Lehman Brothers. Can you walk us down the memory lane a little bit?
Yeah, an exercise in great timing. I've been lucky in countless ways in my career, so this one is, I think probably an important milestone in the journey because, in a lot of ways, it was a bit of a humbling blessing that my career really got kicked off in the midst of what at that point in time in my professional career was kind of the worst chapter in financial history, right? So I had graduated from college with an engineering degree and took a job when I first graduated in 2006 working in New York City for a venture capital firm called Insight Partners. Folks in the venture and software world are very often familiar with that brand. Insight's one of the premier kind of growth stage investors. They've been around for 20 plus years now, have an enormous amount of capital under management. Really wonderful place to cut my teeth and kind of get exposure to the world of founders and how companies get built and why they work and why they don't work and why they're fundable and why they're not fundable. Really amazing experience. But the job that I had was basically cold calling entrepreneurs all day, and every once in a while you meet a great one, and then every once in a while on top of that you do a deal with them and you get to push a check for millions of dollars across the table. And then, your work is done, right? And you're off finding the next deal. And you can only do that so many times before you start to wonder, am I sitting on the wrong side of the table? And what happens, after that check slides across. So by the summer of 2008, I kind of mustered enough confidence and conviction around a business idea that I decided that I was going to leave Insight and start a company. And that company would become RJ Metrics. It was, really the one of the world's first fully cloud hosted business intelligence platforms. But I arranged to, have my last day be a Friday in September of 2008. And then on Saturday, Lehman Brothers collapsed. So a lot of my pipe dreams around, hey, I'm going to hop right out of this venture firm. And I know a thing or two about venture capital, right? I'm going to be able to raise money. It was, the market went into complete lockup, basically, especially the venture markets. That led to a world where, interestingly, we were kind of forced to build RJ Metrics the old-fashioned way, which was the only growth capital that we had access to was revenue from customers. And we spent the first 3-4 years of that company fully bootstrapped. We got to our first $1 million in revenue, our first 100 or so customers, our first dozen employees, all profitably. And I honestly believe that if we had been able to raise capital in 2008, the business would have died, because I think we would have found ourselves over-investing prematurely. And then at the end of our runway, prior to us having validated enough to really raise capital. So a really important journey. And I think a lot of important cutting our teeth needed to happen that I don't think we were intellectually honest enough to know needed to happen. And that Lehman Brothers collapse was this very bizarre saving grace that maybe slowed my career path down by 3 or 4 years, but increased the height of the ceiling pretty substantially.
Wow, that sounds really, really fantastic. Because thinking about it a little bit, like right now, the venture economy is kind of similar because people are forced into going revenue positive as much as they can before they raise capital. Right?
Yeah.
But you play the game in the hard mode, like literally the hard mode.
Well, it is in some weird ways, right? Like it's when you go through these periods, like we've had a few of these, none as extreme since '08 as the kind of COVID zero interest rate phenomenon era and the correction from that. Like those are the most aggressive interest rate fluctuations in short periods of time that we've experienced. But there have certainly been waves of time when, like, you know, the IPO window closed, or you know, we had blips where multiples in one sector or another kind of went a little wonky, and you have to live through these things. I think having experienced what we experienced at RJ in the early days does give a little bit of just a little bit of a stronger foundation of being able to weather those storms and understanding the fundamental importance of product market fit and good long-term minded planning and execution above all else, right? And above short-term optimizations in you know, whatever might be going on in the market, better or worse. And I think maybe sometimes you get lucky and you can catch those waves, especially if you can identify when they're happening, and, you know, capitalize on that. And, you know, the farther along I've gotten in my career, the more I've been able to try to tune that instrument a little bit, right? And make hay while the sun is shining. But none of that makes any sense if you can't see the forest of the trees, right? And zoom out far enough to look at these things in 5-10 year cycles and plan accordingly, right? And kind of getting my butt kicked for the first 5 years of my entrepreneurial career was maybe the best possible foundation on which to figure out how to do that.
100%. I can't agree more. So, I mean, for a lot of us, launching one startup and seeing through it, while like you started two and then you came back for another one.
Yeah.
What made you come back for more? And do you mind giving a quick pitch about what you're trying to solve with Crossbeam right now?
Yeah. So I am criminally insane, I think, is the answer to the answer to your question. I get a lot of my self-actualization from my work and from these entrepreneurial pursuits, which I consider to be really intellectually stimulating and challenging. And I felt like, you know, the reason for doing the third one was really that I had a little bit of like a Goldilocks situation going on, where RJ Metrics was this long, drawn out journey. The company was around for 8 years. We did not get to an IPO. We ended up getting acquired in a private transaction, which was fine, but not you know, not at a level where I felt like, okay, I've done it all, right? Like there was still opportunity and experiences and upward trajectory kind of left on the table on the heels of that, but there was so much really valuable muscle memory and scar tissue and everything else that came out of it. So after eight and a half years, we sold RJ. We started this company called Stitch that was basically directly spun out of RJ. Stitch Data, that company was data pipelines as a service, kind of a middleware layer in the modern data stack. And everything went right with Stitch, and it grew really, really, really rapidly, really quickly. In about 18 months, we got to as many customers at Stitch as we had built up in 8 years at RJ Metrics. It was really, you know, everything was kind of firing on all cylinders there. I think largely due to our extremely intimate knowledge of the market and where the needs were and where all that was going, and some of the technology we were able to kind of carry over from the RJ days. But then after running that business for less than 2 years, a company called Talend came along and offered us a lot of forward credit for what was going on at Stitch. And we got an acquisition offer that kind of was something we couldn't refuse. And ended up selling that company just under 2 years of launching it. And that was a really great feeling. And I think a much more profoundly successful, you know, celebrations are in order style outcome than RJ Metrics was. But it also left us feeling like, oh no, did we walk away too soon? Did we sell too soon? Even though it was something we felt like was a fair, if not aggressive price for what we had sold, what we then did is we kind of watched that industry blossom and continue to grow and continue to produce really interesting other players. And like being able to sit there and say, do we let something that could have been, you know, the IPO-able kind of like generational company, did we let it go 2 years in because, you know, we got a term sheet dangled in front of us that we loved. So the Goldilocks situation then becomes like, one, we probably ran it for too long and should have sold it sooner, and just took a lot of learnings along the way. One of them was like a flash in the pan success that we sold at a peak, but we felt like maybe we sold too soon. And I was there, at this point I'm probably, I don't know, 37 years old or something like that, and I was saying, hey, I think I've got another one in me. And the thing with Crossbeam was, I thought about taking a couple of years off. I thought about doing something, completely different, but I really felt like there was a really, really compelling why now around not just Crossbeam itself, but also like me doing Crossbeam, that I think would go away if I waited a couple of years, and if the sharpness from those past companies was allowed to dull down a little bit. In the beginning of 2019, we launched Crossbeam. So you asked for a quick explanation of Crossbeam. So we ran into this thing at RJ and at Stitch all the time, which was a problem. And that problem was that a lot of our business was influenced by, sourced by, or generally impacted by other companies from outside of our own company's wall. These might have been technology partners that we had integrations with. They might have been channel partners that would service or resell our products. They might have been strategic partners where we'd be looking at acquisitions or other kind of like big strategic initiatives. But all the time we find ourselves saying, okay, we're going to grow faster as a result of working closely with these other companies that we're aligned with, right? We win together. And yet, what are the first questions that you want to ask when you're exploring something like that, or whether you want to measure if something like that is being successful? Well, it's probably things like, hey, partner, how many customers do we actually have in common, and who are they? Or, hey, partner, are my sales reps currently selling to any of the same companies that your sales reps are selling to? And the interesting thing about those questions is that the only way to answer them is to basically draw a Venn diagram between your data and your partner's data. And when it comes to drawing that Venn diagram, math is working against you, because mathematically you can't draw a Venn diagram unless you have all of the data from both of the sets. So to translate that back to those questions, in order to figure out how many customers we have in common, I would have to give my partner my entire customer list so that they can run the analysis to find the 10 customers that we have that are overlapping, or vice versa. And what results is you get this very tricky, like prisoner's dilemma style situation that emerges, where neither company wants to overshare, but both companies know that there would be some really meaningful value that would come out if you could just know what the other one knew and only the little slice that mattered. So we faced this problem at RJ. We faced it at Stitch. At Magento, after RJ got acquired, I saw this problem over and over again. It hits little companies, it hits big companies, it kind of transcends industries. This is like a universal, this like data standoff problem. So at the end of selling Stitch, I kind of had this aha moment, which is like, boy, I sure do wish that this problem was solved. I wish that this data layer existed, which is like what's at the center of all those Venn diagrams that I care about. But no one had solved it. And it turned out that the technology that we used to build Stitch, effectively the modern data stack, was the answer. Because for the first time in history, the API economy had gotten mature enough and strong enough that you could actually build really reliable applications, including those that extract, transform, and load data on top of APIs. And that creates this opportunity for a large set of like data unification applications that could potentially transcend the companies that they serve. So that's all just a really wonky way of saying this. Crossbeam, the core vision was to build something that has never existed before, which is basically an escrow service for data. So a secure, independent third party that sits in between companies who are partnering with each other and does all the hard stuff. You connect your APIs to your Salesforce or your HubSpot or your Google Sheets or your Snowflake or wherever that system of record is that knows who your customers are and who's in your sales pipeline and everything else downstream. And Crossbeam can see it all, but it takes care of ingesting all of that data. It takes care of translating it into a universal data model so that it can be compared company to company. And most importantly, it has this incredible trust and security layer that sits over top of the entire thing that allows every company to retain ownership of their own data and fully dictate who's allowed to see what and under what circumstances. So if you want to say, hey, for these 50 partners, I only want to show summary statistics. How many customers do we have in common? What's the value of the pipeline that overlaps with them? Great. But then with these 10 preferred partners, we're comfortable letting them know who those customers are that overlap, and maybe who we're working with at those companies. Using this thing to be able to not just understand and evaluate who you should be working with, but also enact new go-to-market motions that could have never existed before, based on knowing who to target, how to target them, when and how to leverage the partner ecosystem to drive business forward versus just the buyer intent and other knowledge that kind of permeates out from all that data that Crossbeam gives. That's really the big idea. It's to create this data layer that has never been there before. It felt like this was a company where it was now or never, because if we didn't do it in 2019, someone else was going to. Like the answer to that age-old question was just sitting there staring us in the face.
For sure. Yeah, I come across this problem like quite often in my previous startups, even right now. So I think partnerships has been one of the most strongest engines that helps us drive forward, especially with events or webinars or any of those kind of like challenges, right? And sharing customer data has been like quite a tricky play. And I think Crossbeam has kind of sorted that out.
That's amazing to hear. Yeah, it's the crazy thing about Crossbeam too, that is important to note is this didn't happen overnight, right? You and I are speaking here in 2024. I just told a story from 2019, and it's a little bit of like, well, what's been going on for 5 years? The reality is that the first 3 of those 5 years was a real slog, because Crossbeam, if you think about how it works, it's a network effects business, just like LinkedIn, right? It's like LinkedIn for data. So imagine what would happen if you signed up for LinkedIn and no one that you knew was there. It'd be a pretty bad experience. And that is the world that we found ourselves in 2019 and 2020, where we basically had to go in and help solve the cold start problem that all network effect businesses encounter, but do it in a way where we had more friction than a social network does, because instead of just uploading your photo and a couple of details about your resume, you had to connect your Salesforce instance in order to even get started on the thing. So, we ran this really deliberate 2 to 3 year kind of act one of the business to unlock the power of the virality of the network graph by creating these really, really low friction experiences that helped with onboarding, helped with inviting in partner networks, these manual processes to help onboard companies in pairs in the early days so that everybody had their own like little atomic network. And by 2021, the thing started to have a mind of its own, right? And we tracked this thing called K factor, which is basically like a virality coefficient. So for every company that signs up, how many more companies will end up signing up because of invites and other things they sent. And if you can keep K factor over 1, your network will grow exponentially. And we were able to do that for a couple of years in the very beginning. And it got it to the point now where we're north of 20,000 companies that are on the Crossbeam network. And 7 out of every 10 of those showed up because they were invited in by somebody else who's on that network. So today we find ourselves in a spot where the network graph is established. It's extremely rare that anyone signs up where they don't already have a partner that's on there. But in those early days, that wasn't a guarantee. And that was really, really phase 1 of this business was a very novel problem, very different from RJ Metrics or Stitch in terms of like a minimum viable prototype standpoint, because it only worked if everybody was on it. And when we started, nobody was on it. So that was a really, really unique ride to be on as a B2B SaaS operator.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, that's unique. And also, like, I've not heard any story like that use network effects in such a way. It's usually social networks or like some other kind of network effects used inside Slack or Figma or something for collaboration. But this is really cool. And I mean, you did mention a little bit about the modern data stack as it is today, right? And we also had a short exchange about it when we met. So do you mind sharing your thoughts about that, and what do you expect to change the current data landscape with advancements in AI and tech in general?
Yeah, it's so, the modern data stack, it's near and dear to my heart because I lived that world for so long. And frankly, at RJ Metrics, we got disrupted by it. And at Stitch, it was the reason that we were so successful, right? Like our enemies became our friends really fast in moving from one company to the next. But it's in some ways reflective of this old Jim Barksdale quote that I love, which is like, there's only 2 ways to make money in software: bundling and unbundling. And the quote might even be, there's only 2 ways to make money in business: bundling and unbundling, right? But you look at it in software, and what happened at RJ Metrics? Well, we were a unified suite solution. We did it all. We ingested your data, we warehoused your data, we modeled your data, we visualized your data. And the modern data stack is effectively the unbundling of that generation of technology, right? What was once this singular BI stack that you would very often buy from a single vendor that may have had a bunch of unique components suddenly became like, you've got the five trends of the world in the ETA or ETL or ELT space. You've got the data warehouse landscape with Snowflake and Redshift, and Microsoft and Google playing a part as well. You've got DBT and all the folks that kind of sit in and around the way that you think about data models and data management. You've got all these interesting like data documentation companies and things like that live at various levels of the stack. And then, of course, you have the proper BI layer, which is your Looker, Tableau, Hex, Omni, choose your own adventure in terms of the way in which you might consume or interact with your data. There's so many great companies out there, Sigma, ThoughtSpot, the list goes on and on. But it's basically this like deconstruction of what was once this big monolithic stack. Well, I always talk about that as like the Jim Barksdale effect there. But if you look around, it's not just the data analytics world. That kind of happened everywhere. And it was almost like the emergence of the cloud and the maturity of the API economy that I talked about before just made it very, very possible for that to happen. Like there were these really powerful best-in-class suite solution things that, best-in-class point solution things that kind of disrupted the suite solutions. And you see it in marketing technology, you see it in sales tech, you see it in HR tech, you see it in all these like vertical areas. The thing that you and I talked about at dinner was again, it's kind of like the thing I was talking about in the beginning, where you got to zoom out and look at these things in 10-year spans and realize that nothing is forever. What I think we're starting to see a little bit that's kind of fascinating is a little bit of a bundling cycle happening. And there's a couple precipitating events for that, but like we've had now our, it's been 5 to 10 years in this like unbundled universe where it's almost like this unconstrained infinite unbundling, right? That massively explodes the number of companies out there. Well, you've got the macroeconomic circumstances with the ZIRP era ending and interest rates going up, and just like, capital constraints and the availability of venture capital, just making it less likely that every idea under the sun that's like a slice of a slice of a slice of a value proposition is going to get funded and built. But then maybe more importantly is you always want to look at the disruptive technologies that might be, creating a circumstance where it's advantageous to have a bundling or unbundling cycle happen. The API economy in the cloud kind of brings on the great unbundling of, call it the 2010s into the early 2020s. And now we have AI. And what AI is doing is it's kind of that next wave of massively disruptive technology where the actual interfaces and experiences and like reasons for using these products and differentiators that exist at the individual application layer may become more and more commoditized. They may become less differentiating to build or be really good at. They may cost significantly less to build. And the question then becomes like, what context does your AI agent or does the kind of informed application or entity that's either taking actions on your behalf or helping humans guide their decisions toward taking the right actions, what kind of context does it have? What does it know? And if you're an extremely narrow point solution that only has one sliver of a giant cake of the context of what goes on in your org, then what you can uniquely offer as the primary provider of AI to your end consumer is actually fairly limited. And you get a little bit of this like Lord of the Flies situation where everybody wants to have their own co-pilot and like suck in everybody else's data, but no one has enough of a footprint to actually be the obvious elephant in the room where they can be commanding the market as a result of the extremely proprietary data that they've got. And you see some really interesting emergent things happen out of this. And a great one that I always love to point to is actually in the revenue tools and sales tools space. Like if you think about, you rewind the clock 5 years, you got all these point solutions, right? I could name, 4 or 5 companies. Take Gong, Zoom Info, Outreach, Clary, God, who else? Anyway, just take those four, right? So like Gong, this is like call intelligence, kind of call recording software. Clarity is forecasting software. Outreach is like SDR automation and outbound email sending. Zoom Info, you're in the realm of like data brokers and in that whole world. Well, you go to the websites of all those companies today, and they all look exactly the same. They're all like these revenue orchestration platforms where like Zoom Info has bought Chorus, which competes directly with Gong, and Gong has this awesome AI stuff that they're working on that kind of starts to help you out with forecasting and be able to kind of like understand what's going on in your business. And all of these companies with either through like buy, build, or partner motions have effectively gone down this road of like rebundling in order to try to garner this like command position in the market that not only gives them a larger TAM, but also gives them the leverage when it comes to the AI revolution that's happening, right? And wanting to be positioned in a way where they kind of have all they need to have under their own hood to have the best AI offering, almost forces like a rebundling motion to happen. So like that, I'm watching that so closely and with such great fascination, because it does feel like, AI in and of itself, there's a million things you can talk about, but this is a very interesting, like somewhat knock-on market effect, which is like, we might actually be on the cusp of this next wave of the way people think about things. And it's one of the only two ways to make money in business, right? So it should be a very lucrative time for the people that do it right.
For sure. I can totally see that happening too. Like AI is acting like the bridge, which is kind of like linking different unbundled items or unbundled products, and then kind of like bringing them together and making them like one solid interface. And these days, I can even see landing pages which are kind of talking the same thing, like most of them, like you told about Gong and Clary and others. So we all know, obviously, like data is a complex gold mine, often like not really tapped into well. What's your take on it, and how do you keep your team informed?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The uh, the consumption of data within my companies sometimes makes me feel like the cobbler's children have no shoes, right? Where there is my expectation of what the ideal looks like in terms of informing my team members about what's going on inside of the business is such a high bar, because I've kind of lived in that space, in that world for so long, that I really I expect a lot, and I know what's possible, and it all feels kind of easy to me because I've kind of been on the inside of it, and there is a certain elegance to all this stuff when you look at it. But in reality, it's like, look, when you're at a fast growing company where you're adding teammates all the time and going after emerging markets and defining a category and thinking about metrics that aren't kind of universally standardized, it becomes just very, very challenging to always be on your A game all of the time. And instead, what inevitably happens, I think not just in my companies, but in other businesses as well, is you have a finite number of key team members who have a huge amount of institutional knowledge that accumulates, where they are able to if all else fails in your documentation or your attribution or the comments in your DBT models or whatever else you've got, you can always go call up so-and-so who has been here for X number of years and just kind of like knows how the sausage is made. And we've at various companies, we've gone through various versions of data dictionaries and record keeping and knowledge management platforms and things like that. But I think it's the kind of thing where, like, if you're amazing at it and you've nailed it and you run a project to get it perfect, it's not out of the question that 6 months from now it could be a total train wreck again. Just because right. Enough things change at a rapid enough pace that it needs to be something that's not a project. It's kind of an operating model. And depending on the stage of your company, your operating models naturally need to change just to keep the business healthy. So it's extremely, extremely dynamic, to say the least.
Wow. Okay. That's crazy. So, with obviously, like, there's like you just like whatever you just told, like there's so much data available, right? And I face that problem often as well. Like my previous org at Spenflow, we had that problem a lot. Like we didn't even know what tool to use. We were kind of using like I don't know, like hundreds and thousands of spreadsheets and kind of connecting data from different platforms. Like sales is using something, marketing is using something, And yeah, it has always been like a little bit of a like chaos. But with so much data available, teams often face this analysis paralysis, which I often face
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So, but for you, like, can you share a key metric that is crucial for Crossbeam's success, and if there is one, and or if there is a few, if there are a few, and how did you prioritize that?
Yeah, I'll go back to this. One of our core values at the company is network first, and that is a really important key value. The way I look at key values or core values in starting a company is they're meant to be argument enders, right? Like if you're in a situation where you can't decide should you do path A or should you do path B, and you're able to invoke one of the core values of the company, and it very clearly aligns with one path or another, you know the it's like the Constitution, right? It's like you kind of have to ultimately like abide by that.
Right.
And the core values very, very rarely change or adjust in the course of the company. So network first is there very deliberately because if you remember that 3-year period I talked about where we had to solve for the cold start problem,
Right.
that network first value, I think, is what got us through that because there are so many opportunities where there's a temptation to kind of squeeze the orange before it's ripe, if that makes sense. So charge more money for a particular feature, put up gates in the product to slow people down unless they pay, try to monetize a higher and higher percentage of the people at higher and higher rates as they get more and more value out. Well, because it's a network effects business, if you do that, say, for example, we gated very early on so that you have to pay if you have more than 5 partners. Seems totally logical, right? Like partners are probably proportional to value. It's a great way to gate. The problem then is a lot of people are going to get to 5 partners and they're going to slow down or they are going to stop or they're going to think twice. And it's going to fly directly in the face of the viral spread mechanic that has made Crossbeam actually capable of reaching that escape velocity and getting out of the trap that so many network effects businesses end up dying in. So your question is about a metric that matters. I want to go back to that K factor metric, which is such a huge thing. We track it still to this day. But it really is just a reflection of how viral the product is and how much the growth trajectory of the very top of our funnel, which would be people coming in through the product-led growth motions inside the product and signing up for a free tier and everything else, how healthy is that and how self-sustaining is that? And if you see that K factor drop, it either means it's something in the mechanics of using the product or interfering with the virality of the product, or it means that something out there in the market has changed, or it means that you've reached some kind of market saturation, right? Where there's no companies left to invite because everybody's on. And the identification and diagnosis of that stuff and the remediation of all 3 of those things is quite different and quite distinct. But without knowing at the core whether or not K factor is in a healthy zone and going in the right direction, then you never even get into those conversations. And those conversations are big and strategic and super, super important. So I think it's an unconventional metric. I would argue that almost no B2B SaaS companies like care about it or track it. But for us, it's kind of existentially necessary for the business to make any sense.
Wow. Yeah, that is new. That's a lot of learning for me personally. And so I want to move quickly to like a rapid fire round, and then we have like a couple of more questions after that. In the rapid fire round, Bob, so like first is like tools that matter the most to you.
Tools that matter the most to me. We're a fully remote company, so the boring but extremely true answer is that Slack and Zoom kind of power our entire company. And I think that it's not necessarily a big surprise, but it is the tools of choice that we have that kind of come together to be the place where work gets done. Right. So those are the very, very real ones in my world. I also, I'm an inbox zero person, so I'm a huge fan of Superhuman, the email client. I do run a proper inbox zero strategy. My inbox is at 0 at the end of every day. I might have a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't do, but at least it's either been delegated or, punted to a future date or whatever else, right? And I think I sleep better at night as a result of that. And Superhuman's been great in enabling that.
100%. I got Superhero as well. Like I've been a big fan of Superhuman. Like awesome. Great tool. And the second one is if you can call out one tool which is not known a lot in your stack that you cannot live without.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Let me look here at my. I'm literally looking at like the menu bar here. Let me tell you what I'll tell you this one. This is so ridiculous, but I love it. There is this tool that I use that is called Magnet. It's a Apple OS like laptop or desktop client tool, and it's just a whole bunch of shortcut keys that allow you to take windows and snap them in these really specific different orientations on your screen. So right now I'm chatting with you on Riverside, but I actually have like our browser window like in the top left corner. I've got the about window for Magnet that I just pulled up in the bottom right corner. I've got Slack on the full left of my screen on full height. And I never touch the mouse all day. Like Superhuman has, that's another reason I love Superhuman, right? Is like keyboard shortcuts. I'm a software engineer by background. Like the mouse is for emergency situations only. Like I am living my day with my hands on the keyboard, and Magnet is a way to allow me to manage and organize where windows sit and are configured on my screen without needing to get the mouse and kind of click and drag and custom orient everything. And it ends up being, those hotkeys, I probably hit them 100 times a day, just juggling things around and constantly multitasking.
Wow, amazing. I mean, coming from software myself, I hate using the mouse a lot. So I'm going to give that a shot. One more final thing in the rapid fire round is that like, what is that one unorthodox tactic that has worked for you in the recent times?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think I know it's rapid fire round. I'll give you a real short story on this because I learned this from my co-founder at Argeometrics and Stitch named Jake Stein.
Right.
We were in a VC pitch meeting one time. It was probably like our Series A round or something for Arge. It's like 2012, 2013. And we get some question that is kind of it's a little bit of a trick question. It's kind of, there's a lot of hair on it. And I give what I think is a pretty like eloquent, strong answer to this question. But the reality is there's no there, right? I'm just kind of like talking in circles around the thing. And, it takes me 5 minutes to give this answer. And I stop talking and it's quiet for a second. And Jake says, but if you want the real answer, we don't know. And the VC looked at him and looked at me and looked at him and said, thank you. And I, in the room, I'm like, ego bruised in a big way. And I'm like realizing like, oh man, I think I'm not as smart as I think I am in this situation. But I think one of the things it taught me is like the incredible power that exists in being willing to admit when you don't know, or when, you don't need to hide from the fact that you have like a level of intellectual honesty about your shortcomings or where things might be wrong or hard or difficult, or just like naming the elephant in the room about the thing that's uncomfortable, even if it says something you don't want to hear about yourself. And that is so incredibly powerful. And like after that day, it really like, I really tried to just like push harder on what's going to go wrong if I admit that I actually don't know what I'm talking about here? What's going to go wrong if I actually admit that we screwed up and didn't serve this client in the way that we wanted? Dropping a certain level of like pretension and defensiveness in operating, and instead like kind of maybe looking like an idiot sometimes, and like admitting where you're weak. Maybe you lose some of that cachet of like the idealized image of whatever the founder is supposed to be. But man, from an operational standpoint, it commands so much more respect and accessibility. And, if you show people where the skeletons are, they don't have to go digging for them or wondering where they are. And that also just from like a mental health, taking a load off standpoint, you get to be your authentic self in a lot more conversations when you do that. So like, yeah, the lightning round answer to that, I think, is like, just say you don't know.
Wow, I completely agree. I mean, if you're a fan of The Office, like the Reverend Michael Scott says, it takes a big man to like admit your mistake or say no. Right. Right. So,
Yeah.
so cool. I mean, going on to the last couple of questions. So one of them is that with Crossbeam recently closing its C from A16Z and continuing to grow strong, it's clear you're in this for the long haul, right? So what does the future look like for Crossbeam, and where do you see it headed next?
Yeah, Crossbeam is such a fun one because you can almost think about this business in 3 acts, right? Like I talked about Act 1 earlier, which is getting that network graph going and like solving for the cold start problem, which in a lot of ways like establishes the core like data asset on which the company can build a really interesting universe of applications and places that it can go. So that everything up until this date largely has been focused on that Act 1 kind of stuff, right? And like proving out that this thing should exist and actually bringing it to life. And that also corresponds, right, with like getting to the 8 figures of revenue and like kind of being on the path to like, okay, we've got a real business going on here that makes fundamental sense. And then Act 2 is, okay, we have been able to build something that's really valuable to a lot of people. We've unearthed this data layer that we loved and that we think is so powerful. And now we get to bring that data layer into the hands of operators and of the people who then can put that data and context and the relationships and everything else embedded in their ecosystem graph to run ecosystem-led growth strategies and actually build and scale their companies basically by leveraging what they get out of their partner ecosystems and out of the Crossbeam platform. And this brings us into a world where, we don't just sell to partner teams anymore. We sell to sales teams, we sell to marketing teams, we sell to rev ops. We kind of live inside of that go-to-market software and data stack in a really material way. And that's we're like at the beginning of Act 2 right now, right? And then Act 3, which I get really excited about, which frankly we're already seeing little pieces of, but I think we're still years away from it being the material and primary driver of the company, is it gets kind of meta, right? But it's our own partner ecosystem phase. And what we've started seeing is more and more companies getting started who are building their entire businesses kind of predicated on having access to the Crossbeam data, right? So like their total addressable market is our customer base, right? Like whoever uses Crossbeam. And when you have access to the Crossbeam data, there's a lot of stuff that you can do with it to go to market, to do analytics, to understand strategy better, up and down the revenue funnel from marketing to sales to customer success and in the product org and everywhere else. And there's a lot of tools you can build on top of that. It's almost like a weird unbundling cycle in and of itself. And we've kind of seen the first wave of a handful of companies doing that are startups. I think within 5+ years, there may be an entire economy built on top of that ecosystem graph that we power. And it ends up just kind of bringing us, you think about a lot of late stage publicly traded companies, their ecosystem graph is the growth lever for the future. And I see a path to that for us as well.
Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
I'm back. Okay. Wow. That was weird. It was a timer buzzer for the podcast, but it's okay. I'm really sorry.
No worries.
Hope that didn't disturb the flow much. So we have one final question. So Bob, you recently wrote a book called Ecosystem-Led Growth, which is available on Amazon as hard copies and Kindle copies. The link, I'm going to leave it in the description of the video. And Bob, could you give us like a short pitch or a short summary of what to expect in the book?
Yeah, totally. Ecosystem-Led Growth, published by Wiley. What would I be if I didn't have a copy on my desk? So this book really is just a culmination of all the work that we've done, not just at Crossbeam, but in the kind of the ecosystem and industries that surround Crossbeam over the last 5 years. We were fortunate to partner with Wiley, who is a big international publishing house focused on mostly technology and business books. And they found it really compelling that it seemed like there was a large amount of momentum behind the idea that partner ecosystems could be the most profitable, scalable mechanism for growing businesses in the coming decade for companies. And this on the heels of a lot of traditional methodologies, whether it's outbound sales or buying ads or kind of classic SEO and inbound strategies, all being challenged or oversaturated or disrupted by AI or otherwise kind of needing to be rebuilt from the ground up. And ecosystem data and relationships and strategy is a little bit of a cure for a lot of those methodologies, and actually is a methodology in and of itself. So ecosystem-led growth is really just, it's a go-to-market motion that relies on the partner ecosystem as the primary way to attract, close, and expand business for your company. And if the ecosystem is touching the deal, then it's an ELG motion. And this book kind of goes into the details around, it tells a little bit of my story around what landed me in this space and why I got so excited about it, which includes a lot of this RJ Stitch inside baseball stuff. Then it talks about the macro environment and a lot of the classic go-to-market methodologies that are starting to fail and why. And then the best part is kind of the part 3 of the book, which is the actual ELG playbooks of incredible companies, like Gong, like Stripe, like Procore, like so many others, who tell their stories in this book and share how ELG has impacted their business and exactly the playbooks that they use to make that happen. So we were really lucky. In our launch week, we were on the USA Today National Bestseller list. We were on the Publishers Weekly top 20 nonfiction new releases on the week we came out. We're in the running for a bunch of these, best book awards and things like that. So we were honestly not expecting this much of a pop on the book, but it seems to be resonating really well, and it's got its own little viral tail to it. So we're happy to be a part of that.
Wow. That's awesome. Trying to crack GTM myself for LiveDocs. I think I'm going to grab a copy for myself.
Awesome. Please do. Yeah.
For sure. So that's pretty much it, Bob. I don't have any more questions. And thank you for joining us today, Bob. Until next time, keep crunching your data, folks.
Cool. Thanks so much.